Trump's tariffs just got shut down. Canada and the EU aren't backing down. In fact, they're taking charge. But what's Trump's next move? And how is Canada redefining its entire trade strategy to outmaneuver US economic pressure? This isn't just about tariffs. It's about power, influence, and the future of global trade. Trump's aggressive tariff policies were meant to bring trading partners to their knees. But instead, they've sparked a backlash that's shaking the foundations of international trade. Canada and the EU, two of America's largest trading partners, are no longer playing defense. They've joined forces, forming a strategic alliance aimed at countering US economic pressure. But how did we get here? It all began when Trump slapped hefty tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel, citing national security concerns. The move was seen as a direct attack on Canada's economy, and it sent shockwaves through global markets. For Canada, this wasn't just about economics, it was about sovereignty and respect. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded swiftly, implementing retaliatory tariffs on US goods. But this wasn't just a tit-for-tat measure. It marked the beginning of Canada's strategic shift in trade policy. Meanwhile, the European Union was facing its own battle with Trump's tariffs on European automobiles. This common struggle brought Canada and the EU closer, leading to intensified negotiations on trade cooperation. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which had been somewhat dormant, suddenly gained new significance. It became the backbone of a growing alliance, one that aimed to reduce dependency on U.S. markets. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister openly criticized Trump's trade war tactics, calling them short-sighted and self-destructive. Behind the scenes, Canadian diplomats were busy strengthening ties with European leaders, pushing for a united front against U.S. economic aggression. This wasn't just about survival, it was about taking control of the narrative. But Trump didn't back down. In fact, he doubled down, threatening even harsher tariffs if Canada and the EU didn't bend to his demands. Yet, instead of caving, they adapted. Canada began diversifying its trade relationships, increasing exports to Europe and Asia. It was a calculated move to minimize the impact of US tariffs. The stakes were high. For decades, Canada's economy had been heavily reliant on US trade, but now it was clear that the rules had changed. Trump's America First policy was more than just a slogan. It was a direct challenge to Canada's economic security. In response, Canada adopted a bold new strategy, pivoting towards Europe and Asia to create a more resilient and diversified economy. The EU was equally determined. Leaders in Brussels recognized the importance of standing firm against U.S. protectionism. They worked closely with Canada, enhancing CETA's implementation and exploring new areas of cooperation. This was no longer just about tariffs. It was about building a long-term strategic partnership. The narrative was changing. Canada and the EU were no longer merely reacting to Trump's tariffs. They were proactively redefining global trade dynamics. It was a high-stakes game of economic chess, and they were making bold moves. But the question remains, how far are they willing to go? And can they truly break free from U.S. economic dominance? The answer lies in Canada's next big play, one that could change the global trade landscape forever. With Trump's tariffs tightening the noose, Canada knew it needed a game-changing strategy. It wasn't enough to retaliate tit for tat. To survive and thrive, Canada had to reduce its dependence on the U.S. market, and that's exactly what it set out to do. Enter CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the European Union. At first, CETA was just another trade deal, aimed at boosting exports and reducing tariffs. But under the pressure of Trump's aggressive trade policies, it evolved into a powerful tool of economic resilience. By strengthening ties with Europe, Canada found a way to bypass U.S. tariffs and access a massive market of over 500 million consumers. Exports of Canadian goods to the EU surged, from agricultural products to high-tech machinery. This wasn't just about selling more maple syrup or timber. It was about strategic diversification. By spreading its economic bets across Europe, Canada was shielding itself from the volatility of U.S. trade policies. But Canada didn't stop there. While Trump was burning bridges with traditional allies, Canada was building new ones. It turned its attention to the Asia-Pacific region, where the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership was taking shape. This massive trade pact linked Canada with 10 other Pacific Rim countries, including heavyweights like Japan and Australia. It was a masterstroke of geopolitical maneuvering. The CPTPP wasn't just about lowering tariffs, it was about gaining a foothold in rapidly growing markets. For Canada, this meant new opportunities for its energy sector, agriculture, and technology exports. It also meant reducing its reliance on the U.S. economy, a strategic necessity in an era of unpredictable trade wars. The timing was perfect, as the U.S. withdrew from the original Trans-Pacific Partnership under Trump's America First agenda. Canada stepped in to fill the void. It emerged as a champion of free trade in the Pacific, positioning itself as a reliable partner in a region wary of American isolationism. This bold pivot was risky, but it paid off. Canadian exports to CPTPP countries soared, diversifying its economic portfolio and reducing vulnerability to U.S. tariffs. More importantly, it sent a clear message to Washington. Canada would not be bullied into submission. The political implications were equally significant. By aligning with both Europe and the Asia-Pacific, Canada was effectively counterbalancing U.S. influence. It was no longer just a junior partner in North America. It was a global trade power in its own right. Meanwhile, Trump was watching. His tariffs had backfired, driving Canada closer to his geopolitical rivals. But he didn't relent. Instead, he ramped up economic pressure, threatening even more tariffs on Canadian goods. It was a dangerous game of economic brinkmanship, with both sides refusing to back down. Behind closed doors, Canadian trade negotiators were working around the clock, crafting new deals and shoring up alliances. They knew the stakes were high. If Trump succeeded in crippling Canada's economy, it would be a victory for protectionism and a blow to global free trade. But if Canada's pivot paid off, it would be a blueprint for other nations facing U.S. economic aggression. This wasn't just about dollars. It was about power, influence, and the future of international relations. Canada was rewriting the rules of global trade, defying the conventional wisdom that smaller economies couldn't stand up to American might. But this bold strategy came with risks. By challenging the U.S., Canada was gambling with its most important trading relationship. Would the bet pay off, or would Trump retaliate with even more devastating tariffs? The next move could change everything. The battle lines were drawn, and the world was watching. Would Canada's trade pivot be the masterstroke that redefined global commerce, or would it provoke a full-scale trade war with its powerful neighbor? As Trump's tariffs continued to disrupt global trade, Canada found an unexpected ally: Europe. But this wasn't just about economics, it was about geopolitics. By deepening ties with the European Union, Canada was challenging U.S. dominance on the world stage. CETA became more than a trade agreement, it became a political statement. It symbolized a shared commitment to free trade and multilateralism, a direct contrast to Trump's protectionist agenda. Behind closed doors, European leaders saw Canada as a crucial partner in counterbalancing American economic aggression. And they were right. As the tariffs hit, European companies started looking to Canada as a gateway to North America. Canadian ports became bustling hubs of transatlantic trade, with goods flowing from Europe to Canada and then strategically re-exported to the U.S., bypassing Trump's tariffs. It was a clever workaround that infuriated Washington, but was perfectly legal under international trade rules. The impact was profound. European investments in Canada surged, fueling job growth and technological innovation. This wasn't just about economics, it was about strategic leverage. By boosting Canada's economy, the EU was strengthening its ally against US pressure. But Canada and the EU weren't just playing defense, they were going on the offensive. They launched a series of joint initiatives, from digital trade to environmental sustainability, setting global standards without American input. It was a calculated move to isolate the U.S. diplomatically while promoting a new world order based on cooperation, not confrontation. The political implications were explosive. Trump accused Canada of undermining American interests and lashed out at the EU with even more tariffs. But Canada and Europe stood firm, refusing to back down. It was a bold show of solidarity that caught Washington off guard. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and European leaders held high-profile summits, emphasizing their shared values and commitment to rules-based trade. The optics were powerful, two of America's closest allies standing shoulder to shoulder against Trump's economic bullying. But this alliance was more than symbolic. It was a strategic masterstroke. By aligning with Europe, Canada was diversifying its supply chains and securing access to critical resources, from advanced machinery to green technology. It was building an economic firewall against future U.S. tariffs. Trump saw the threat and responded with a new round of economic pressure, targeting key Canadian industries like steel and aluminum. The message was clear: break your alliance with Europe or face the consequences. But Canada didn't budge. Instead, it doubled down on its partnership with the EU, accelerating joint research projects and cross-border investments. Behind the scenes, European diplomats were working closely with their Canadian counterparts, coordinating strategies and sharing intelligence. This was no ordinary trade relationship. It was a geopolitical alliance designed to counterbalance American power. With every tariff, Trump was pushing Canada and Europe closer together, creating a powerful economic bloc capable of challenging U.S. supremacy. And it was working. The combined economic might of Canada and the EU was reshaping global trade, forcing other nations to choose sides. Japan, Australia, and even China were watching closely, reconsidering their trade strategies in this new geopolitical landscape. Would they align with the US? Or join the growing Canada-EU alliance? The answer could determine the future of global commerce. But this bold partnership wasn't without risks. By defying Trump, Canada was gambling with its largest trading relationship, and the EU was taking a similar risk, challenging its most powerful ally. If Trump retaliated with even harsher economic measures, both Canada and Europe could face severe economic fallout. The world was on edge, watching this high-stakes chess game unfold. Would Canada's alliance with the EU succeed in countering US tariffs, or would Trump's economic aggression bring them to their knees? One thing was certain: this was no ordinary trade dispute. It was a battle for global influence, with Canada and the EU rewriting the rules of international commerce. But the fight was far from over, and Trump wasn't about to back down. Would Canada and Europe's bold strategy provoke a full-scale trade war, or would it force Trump to reconsider his aggressive tariffs? As Trump's tariffs continued to disrupt North American trade, Canada made a bold strategic move. It turned to the Pacific. But this wasn't just about finding new markets. It was about countering U.S. influence by deepening ties with Asia-Pacific powerhouses. Enter the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTP. Originally envisioned as a counterbalance to China's growing economic power, the CPTPP became Canada's ticket to a new era of global trade. When Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, he handed Canada an unprecedented opportunity to lead, and Canada seized it. By championing the CPTPP, Canada wasn't just securing access to fast-growing markets like Japan, Vietnam, and Australia. It was positioning itself as a global trade leader. This was a masterstroke in economic diplomacy, allowing Canada to diversify its export base while reducing dependency on the U.S. market. Behind the scenes, Canadian negotiators were crafting a strategic framework, ensuring that the CPTPP would not only lower tariffs, but also set high standards for digital trade, environmental protection, and labor rights. It was a bold vision for a modern, rules-based trading system that directly challenged Trump's protectionist policies. The impact was immediate. Canadian exports to CPTPP countries surged, particularly in key sectors like agriculture, automotive, and technology. Japanese investors poured money into Canadian infrastructure, while Australian companies sought strategic partnerships in energy and mining. Canada was rapidly becoming a Pacific powerhouse, but this pivot to Asia wasn't just about economics. It was about geopolitical leverage. By strengthening ties with CPTPP members, Canada was building a coalition capable of countering U.S. pressure. It was a calculated strategy designed to give Canada more bargaining power in its trade disputes with Washington. Trump saw the threat and lashed out, accusing Canada of undermining American interests. But there was little he could do. By aligning with the CPTPP, Canada had secured access to markets representing nearly 13% of the global economy, effectively neutralizing the impact of U.S. tariffs. The political implications were explosive. For decades, the U.S. had dominated North American trade, but now Canada was leading a new economic bloc that excluded Washington entirely. It was a seismic shift in global power dynamics, and Trump knew it, but Canada wasn't finished yet. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau embarked on a high-profile tour of Asia, signing new trade agreements and deepening diplomatic ties. In Tokyo, he emphasized Canada's commitment to free trade and multilateralism, a direct rebuke to Trump's isolationist agenda. The optics were powerful. Standing alongside Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, Trudeau made it clear that Canada was no longer content to play second fiddle to the US. It was asserting itself as an independent global power, ready to challenge American dominance. Meanwhile, Trump's tariffs were backfiring. US companies that relied on Canadian imports were feeling the squeeze, facing higher costs and disrupted supply chains. American farmers were losing market share in Asia as Canadian competitors leveraged their CPTPP advantages. The irony was glaring. Trump's own policies were weakening America's economic influence while strengthening Canada's. And Trudeau was capitalizing on every opportunity. In Australia, he secured strategic investments in renewable energy, positioning Canada as a leader in the global green economy. But the real masterstroke came when Canada invited the UK to join the CPTPP. With Britain desperate for post-Brexit trade deals, Canada played its cards perfectly, expanding the partnership's economic power and political clout. Washington was rattled. Trump lashed out, threatening even harsher tariffs on Canadian goods. But the CPTPP shielded Canada from the worst economic impacts, allowing it to weather the storm while continuing to expand its trade network. Behind the scenes, U.S. business leaders were pressuring the White House to reconsider its tariffs. They saw the writing on the wall. Canada's CPTPP strategy was working, and American companies were paying the price. But Trump wasn't about to admit defeat. He doubled down, accusing Canada of economic sabotage and threatening to withdraw from NAFTA entirely. It was a desperate move, one that risked plunging North America into a full-blown trade war. Canada was ready. By diversifying its markets and securing strategic alliances, it had built an economic firewall against U.S. pressure. The message was clear. Canada was no longer beholden to American economic power. This was a bold new era in international trade, with Canada leading the charge. But the stakes were rising. By challenging U.S. dominance, Canada was risking retaliation not just from Washington, but also from other global powers watching its every move. Would this high-stakes strategy pay off? Or would Trump's aggressive tactics force Canada to back down? The battle lines were drawn, and the next move could change the future of global trade. As Canada's trade strategy reshaped global dynamics, it found itself in the crossfire of a geopolitical storm, caught between the world's two largest economies, the United States and China. Trump's tariffs weren't just aimed at Canada. They were part of a broader economic war with Beijing, and Canada was right in the middle. China watched Canada's CPTPP success with keen interest. Beijing saw an opportunity to expand its influence in the Asia-Pacific, and Canada's growing economic ties with CPTPP members made it a key player. But this was a double-edged sword. The closer Canada got to Asia, the more it risked provoking Washington's ire. Trump was determined to isolate China economically using tariffs, sanctions, and diplomatic pressure. He demanded loyalty from allies, pressuring Canada to take sides. But Canada had no intention of choosing between its largest trading partner and the world's fastest-growing economy. Instead, it played a masterful balancing act. Canada continued to strengthen its CPTPP ties while cautiously expanding trade with China. It pursued a diversified strategy, ensuring no single market held too much power over its economy. It was a high-stakes gamble, but one that offered long-term security. This strategic ambiguity allowed Canada to navigate the US-China rivalry without getting dragged into a full-blown trade war. But Trump wasn't pleased. He accused Canada of undermining American efforts to contain China's economic rise, ramping up the pressure with more tariffs and even threatening to block Canadian exports entirely. Canada's economic future hung in the balance, but it refused to back down. Instead, it doubled down on its multilateral approach, deepening its partnership with the European Union through CETA and solidifying its role in the CPTP. Canada's message was clear. It wouldn't be bullied into submission, but this bold stance came at a cost. Trump retaliated by targeting key Canadian industries, including aluminum, steel, and automotive parts. Canadian businesses were caught in the crossfire, facing skyrocketing costs and disrupted supply chains. Behind closed doors, Canadian officials scrambled to find solutions. They ramped up domestic production, sought new suppliers, and leveraged their CPTPP and EU trade networks to bypass US restrictions. It was a complex, high-stakes game of economic chess, with Canada maneuvering to protect its interests while avoiding direct confrontation. Meanwhile, China saw an opportunity to exploit the rift between Canada and the US. Beijing extended trade offers, promising lucrative deals in technology, energy, and agriculture. It was a tempting proposition, but one fraught with political risks. Canada was wary of becoming too dependent on China, especially given Beijing's track record of using trade as a political weapon. But rejecting China outright would have played directly into Trump's hands, strengthening his economic stranglehold on Canada. So, Canada walked a tightrope, cautiously expanding trade with China while maintaining its CPTPP and EU alliances. It was a delicate balance, requiring strategic diplomacy and careful economic planning, but it was working. Canada's exports to China surged, particularly in high-demand sectors like natural resources, technology, and food products. At the same time, its CPTPP and EU markets continued to grow, giving Canada unprecedented economic flexibility. Trump watched in frustration as Canada successfully navigated the economic minefield he had created. His tariffs were failing to cripple the Canadian economy, and his demands for loyalty were falling on deaf ears. Desperate to regain control, Trump threatened to revoke Canada's access to the US financial system, a move that would have catastrophic consequences. But Canada was ready. It had spent years diversifying its financial partnerships, reducing its reliance on US banks, and expanding its ties with Europe and Asia. The threat fell flat. Canada's economic independence was stronger than ever, backed by a global network of trade agreements and strategic alliances. It was a triumph of diplomacy and strategic foresight, a victory that reshaped the balance of power in North American trade. But the battle wasn't over. Trump's tariffs had sparked a new era of economic nationalism, with countries around the world rethinking their trade policies. The global economic landscape was shifting, and Canada would need to stay one step ahead to maintain its newfound power. This was the dawn of a new world order, one where traditional alliances were being rewritten and old power structures were crumbling. Canada had emerged as a key player, leading a coalition of nations determined to defend free trade against protectionism. But this victory came with new challenges. Canada's success had made it a target, not just for Trump, but for other global powers vying for economic influence. The next phase of this geopolitical chess game would be even more dangerous, with new alliances, shifting loyalties, and the ever-present threat of economic retaliation. Could Canada maintain its strategic independence amid rising global tensions? Would its bold trade strategy continue to pay off, or would it be forced to pick a side in the escalating US-China conflict? As the dust settled on Trump's tariffs, the world watched with bated breath, waiting to see Canada's next move. Would it continue to challenge American dominance? Or would the rising tensions with China force Canada to reconsider its alliances? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comment section and subscribe our channel for more updates. Thank you.